This is R2D Tech, and with all of the electric things going on today, we thought we'd make a video discussing the possibility of electric vehicles being dominant in the future and all the infrastructure that goes in place to make this thing happen.
So, over the past few years or even months, you've probably noticed that there have been more and more charging stations for electric cars and more people buying electric cars in your area. That's kind of a global effort to try and reduce carbon emissions. But before we can reduce those carbon emissions from cars, two things need to happen. Firstly, more people need to buy electric cars. But secondly, and probably more importantly, we need to renew how we actually produce our energy. So we need to be using renewable energy sources like hydroelectric power, wind turbines, solar energy, instead of burning fossil fuels. So at the moment, buying an electric car is really no better than buying a petrol or a diesel car. So it's something to think about.
If we really want to make the future electric, then we're going to have to mass produce electric vehicles, which Tesla are already trying to do with their Model 3 variant of the lineup. But the problem is, even Tesla, who have specialized in electric cars for a long time, are struggling to mass produce. Now, other companies like BMW are working on electric cars as well, and they're mass producing them quite effectively. But the problem is that at the moment, all of these vehicles are much more expensive than your standard diesel or petrol engine cars. And that's not going to help sell to the masses. The average person doesn't want to pay more than £30,000 for a car. And at the moment, a Tesla starts at $35,000 for the Model 3, and that's not even properly out yet in the UK. Whereas other models like BMW electric cars can start around $70,000, which is way more expensive than what the average person will pay. We do have other companies like Nissan rolling out the cars like Nissan Leaf, which are a bit more affordable, but also infrastructure, like we said, needs to change. In the UK, for example, there are hardly any electric chargers around on residential streets, whereas in the US it's a bit better with the supercharged network with Tesla have made, but we do need to make it a lot more global if people are going to take the time to charge their cars, and it needs to be a lot easier than it is right now.
Now, one of the inconveniences of having an electric car is charging it. Now, whereas a petrol car would take a few minutes to fill up the tank with petrol, whereas charging an electric car could take hours, which is incredibly inconvenient if you're trying to charge it on a road trip. You'd have to take a pretty long break in between to charge it and maybe sit down and have a cup of tea or something. But if people are really going to start buying electric cars, it needs to be a lot more convenient than this. One of the ways around it is installing a charger inside your own home, so it's a lot easier to charge it overnight. That might solve a problem, but that's incredibly expensive and probably inconvenient because you might not have a place to put it. If you're lucky enough to have an electric charger near your house, that kind of solves that problem, but not many people do have them near their house. It's pretty inconvenient. Now, some companies like Tesla do offer what's called supercharge, which charges your battery in under half an hour. Half an hour is still a pretty long time if you take into account that a petrol tank would take minutes to fill up. While it's a lot better than hours, it's still not good enough for what people would expect.
When it comes to making electric vehicles much faster to refuel, there's certain things you can do. One thing which Elon Musk experimented with a while ago is actually battery swapping stations. The only problem is that the battery would have to be semi-exposed under the car so you could easily access it, which is a slight issue since lithium-ion batteries can catch fire really easily if they're impacted by a stone, for example, on the road. I still think it's a very good idea if the batteries, for example, had extra shielding underneath, but were still easily accessible. In this way, you could drive into a station and robots could just replace the battery within a minute and perhaps charge you like a £5-10 fee, which is still cheaper than refueling. But then they would take your battery and recharge it over the 30-minute period or however long it takes and put it into another car later on. This would make recharging the car so much faster and more efficient for people, so you wouldn't have to wait 30 or 40 minutes. This would all be done behind the scenes. You would just get a new battery. And I think that's basically the way to go forward, rather than everyone having to charge their own batteries for like 40 minutes, when most people probably don't have their own chargers in their house.
Now, two of the biggest players in the electric car market have been Tesla and Nissan. They've released two of the mass market cars, the Model 3 from Tesla and the Nissan Leaf from Nissan. They're both kind of similarly priced. The Tesla is slightly more expensive at £35,000, whereas the Nissan Leaf is £28,000. But in my opinion, you're getting a much more luxurious car with the Model 3. You're getting that massive touchscreen where you can do all your controls, from control your music, air conditioning, everything really. And you also have to consider that in the future, in about 5 to 6 years time, we will have self-driving cars on the road. And if you want, the Tesla can come equipped with self-driving functionality, but you have to pay a little bit extra for it. So I would say overall, the Tesla is the car to go for.
So, in conclusion, it seems that electric cars are becoming a real thing nowadays, and we know that there's laws being put in place to limit the use of diesel and petrol cars. For example, much larger taxes on road vehicles which use petrol or diesel. And by 2040 in the UK at least, you won't be allowed to drive a petrol car anymore. So everyone is going to be transitioning to either a hybrid or fully electric car in the next few years. It might be worth getting ahead of the game and getting into self-driving, for example, by buying a Tesla, which is actually going to be legal in a few years as well. Now, obviously the prices of electric cars are quite steep at the moment, but there's many companies making much cheaper electric cars which are going to be coming out in a few years, and Tesla might just release a much cheaper model which is affordable to everyone. Even though the Model 3 is supposed to be a mass market vehicle, but some people think it's still too expensive. We look forward to seeing what else any other company can come up with, but we're really behind Tesla, and we hope that renewable energy is also produced in the near future, just like in some Scandinavian countries where they're almost fully renewable. So we'll be back next week with another video. If you like this video, then you might consider liking and subscribing. But otherwise, see you next week.